Welcome to Mr. Moros. Today I'm going to tell you a story about two men, a remote patch of wilderness, and an encounter so unsettling that neither of them ever set foot in those woods again. This isn't a story about rumors or blurry photographs. This is about what they saw with their own eyes and the questions that haunted them long after they left the trees behind. Stick around to the end, because sometimes what's most terrifying isn't what's chasing you. It's what's simply standing there, waiting, watching. It was late October, 1988. The kind of cold that cuts straight through your jacket had begun to creep into Madera County, California. But for lifelong friends, Jack and Rick, it was the perfect weekend to go hunting. They were both in their early 40s then, seasoned outdoorsmen, men who respected the wild but never feared it. They had spent years tracking game through these woods, dense, towering forests that seemed to stretch forever, untouched and silent, save for the occasional rustle of a deer or the distant call of a crow. Jack was the planner between them, meticulous and cautious. Rick, the free spirit, always ready to dive headfirst into the unknown. Together, they made a good team. That morning, they loaded Jack's old pickup truck with supplies, 2 rifles, ammunition, sleeping bags, a portable stove, coffee, canned beans, a weathered thermos of whiskey, just enough to take the edge off the cold nights, and the tools they needed to make camp far away from the world. Their destination was a patch of forest, about 6 miles off an abandoned logging road, a place so remote, Rick had joked once, you could scream your lungs out and nobody would ever hear you. They laughed about it then. Later, that thought would gnaw at them like a rat at the back of their minds. The drive took most of the afternoon. The old road was barely more than a suggestion, winding through hills and forests so thick, the sunlight barely touched the ground. As they drove deeper, Jack noticed how the trees seemed to grow denser, older. There was something about these woods, something heavy. But he pushed the feeling aside. They were here for a weekend of hunting and camaraderie, not ghost stories. By late afternoon, they had set up a modest camp beside a narrow, rocky stream. They built a fire, heated coffee, and watched the sun bleed into the horizon, leaving behind a bruised purple sky. As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. The fire crackled and hissed, spitting embers into the growing dark. They talked about old times, foolish things they'd done in their youth, close calls on previous hunts, and drank coffee spiked with whiskey. It should have been one of those perfect, peaceful nights that stayed warm in memory. Instead, something was already changing around them. They just hadn't noticed it yet. Around midnight, as Jack was poking at the fire, he realized something strange. The forest had gone silent. Not just quiet, silent. No crickets, no night birds, no rustling in the brush. It was the kind of silence that presses against your skin, that makes the hair on your arms stand up without you knowing why. Rick noticed, too. He stopped mid-sentence, his words hanging in the air like a cloud of breath. "You hear that?" he asked, voice low. Jack nodded, scanning the tree line. The fire's glow only pushed back the darkness a few feet, and beyond that was an endless black wall. He told himself it was just the cold. Animals hunkered down. Natural. But some deeper part of him, the part that had nothing to do with logic, was already sounding the alarm. They sat in tense silence for several long minutes, the fire the only thing anchoring them to normalcy. Then, something moved, just at the edge of the light. A shift, a shadow against the black. Big. Jack rose slowly, his hand drifting to his rifle without thinking. Rick did the same. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Whatever was out there wasn't normal. At first it was just a shape. Massive, impossibly tall and bulky. It moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, as if completely unconcerned about being seen. The firelight, weak and flickering, caught glimpses of it. Broad shoulders, arms that hung unnaturally low, and something like fur. Dark, matted, covering its body. Jack's brain tried to slot it into something familiar. Bear. Man, anything. But the creature didn't move like a bear, and it was far, far too large to be a man. It was upright, completely upright, and smooth, not staggering or lurching like an injured animal, but walking with the fluid motion of something that belonged on two legs. Jack's hand clenched around the stock of his rifle so hard his knuckles went white. But instinct screamed at him, "Don't raise it, don't even blink." Rick stood beside him, breathing shallow, his entire body locked in place. The creature moved closer, not charging, not threatening, just approaching, until it stood maybe 30 feet from their fire. For a terrifying moment, they could see it clearly enough to burn the image into their memories. It was massive, 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. Thick-corded muscles moved under its hair, and its face, shadowed but visible, was deeply set, with a wide, flat nose and a heavy brow. Its eyes reflected the firelight with a dull, reddish gleam. But it wasn't the size or the strangeness that froze them in place. It was the expression. There was intelligence there, not curiosity, not fear, not even aggression. It looked at them the way a man might look at squirrels fighting over crumbs. Aware, but uninterested. It stood there, breathing slow and steady for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, it turned, and just as silently as it had appeared, it walked back into the forest. No crashing, no snapping branches, no panicked flight. It simply melted into the darkness, leaving the men standing there, rooted to the ground, feeling suddenly, impossibly small. For several long minutes, neither Jack nor Rick of the fire cracked and popped, but it sounded wrong now, too loud, too jarring. Finally, Jack whispered, voice hoarse, "You saw that, right?" Rick nodded, his face pale and set. Another long silence. Then Rick added, barely audible, "I don't think it cared we were here." Jack wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. They sat back down slowly, never taking their eyes off the tree line. They didn't sleep. They didn't speak again for hours. Every time a branch creaked or the wind stirred the leaves, both men flinched, hearts hammering in their chests. But nothing else came out of the woods that night. The silence remained. At the first hint of dawn, a pale gray bleeding into the black, they packed their gear in record time. No coffee, no breakfast. They just wanted out. The woods, once a place of familiarity and comfort, had turned into a living thing, something vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to them. The walk back to the truck was brutal. Every sound, every shifting shadow felt like it was watching them. At one point, Rick thought he heard footsteps behind them, matching their own. They didn't check. They didn't want to know. When they finally reached the clearing where they had parked the truck, both men exhaled shakily, relief flooding their bodies. Jack fumbled the keys, hands trembling, and when the engine finally roared to life, it was the sweetest sound either of them had ever heard. They didn't talk much on the drive back. There was too much to process, too much to explain. Later, over cheap coffee in a greasy diner, Jack tried, desperately, to rationalize it. Maybe it had been a bear with mange, maybe it had been a prank, some lunatic in a ghillie suit. But every theory collapsed under its own weight. Nothing explained the size. Nothing explained the silence. Nothing explained the feeling they both had, deep in their bones, that whatever they had seen had been something different. Something not meant for human eyes. They made a silent agreement that day. They would tell no one, not their wives, not their friends, not anyone who would believe them. Two grown men, seasoned hunters, scared out of the woods by a shadow. Over the years, the memory never dulled. Jack eventually moved to Oregon, away from the dense forests he had once loved. Rick stayed, but he sold his hunting gear and never stepped foot in the deep woods again. The wilderness had lost its innocence for them. They had seen something they weren't supposed to see. And deep down, both men knew the truth. It wasn't just an animal. It wasn't just a myth. It was real, and it was still out there, moving through the trees just beyond the reach of firelight, watching, waiting, and utterly, terrifyingly indifferent to whether you saw it or not. Thanks for spending some time with me today. If you enjoyed this story, and you want to hear more real accounts of strange encounters, unexplained mysteries, and things that lurk just beyond the edge of what we understand, make sure you follow the channel. I'll be back soon with another true story. Until then, stay curious and stay safe.